And welcome back to Latin Vibes. My name is Santi, and I am your lovely host for the n numbers of time, if that's how you say it. How's everybody doing? I hope that you guys are doing well. I hope that this summer is treating you right, except if you're in the southern hemisphere. Then it's not summer for you. But then I wonder, do they still call it summer? Because we're planning, well, me and my family, we're planning a trip to Argentina in the winter for us, which will be summer for them, right? I mean, that's when it's hot. My question is, do they still call it summer? I don't know. Like, think about it. It's winter, but it's hot. It's interesting. I saw this map. I visited some family friends, and they're from Chile. And I saw this map of theirs that had South America inverted. That means that, like, Argentina and Chile were at the top, and countries like Colombia and Venezuela and Brazil were further down. Because south is north, and north is south. You know what I mean? It's a weird little phenomenon. It actually reminds me of this book I read recently by Dante Alighieri. It's called The Divine Comedy. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. Maybe not directly, but at least in the songs that you listen to or the movies that you've watched. It tells the story of Dante as he travels through hell, purgatory, and eventually heaven or paradise. And it's really interesting. It was a really tough read. The book I read was translated by this person. His name was Henry Longfellow. He was a Longfellow. And he was a very prominent poet back in the 1800s. He had this club, it was called Dante's Club, where he tried to come up with better ways of translating the Divine Comedy. And he settled on the copy, the version that I read. And it's written in very classical English, let's say. It almost feels like reading Shakespeare, which is okay. I mean, you've got to read these things once in your life. But I don't think that I would read it again. Anyway, what I was trying to get at was that at one point when he's in hell, he's at the bottom of the world. Because apparently that's where hell is. It's the heaviest, deepest point. Back in medieval history, they used to see it that way. The heavier, the deeper something is, the less holy or the more sinful it is. That's why things like stars or the sun, any celestial beings were seen as very holy. In fact, and spoiler alert, I mean, this book has been out for almost 1,000 years, so I think I can talk about what happens on it, but still, spoiler alert. That's why heaven is up in the stars, and God is essentially the sun. I don't know if he says it explicitly, but he draws a comparison a lot. The sun, God, that illuminates the world and everything, which is really interesting, because even though Dante's views are clearly very Catholic, I dare to say even extreme at times, it shares a lot of similarities with Greek mythology, for example, or even indigenous cultures. I feel that it's been pretty common around the world to revere the sun and the moon and stars like Jupiter or Saturn or Mars or Venus. Think about all the ways that they've been used to describe human emotions or interactions, relationships. So it's interesting. It was one of the things that stood out to me, definitely. But overall, the book was a little boring for my taste. They did have some really exciting parts that made me think, wow, this is a good book. But it was hard to read. It's like this one book I read a while back, 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. The author, he was born in Chile, but he moved to Mexico City early on. And then he moved again to Barcelona. And he constantly traveled between those not three, let's say between Mexico and España. And he wrote this book, 2666, or actually, he wrote 5 books and it became one book. And he wrote these 5 books, all telling different stories, but related in one way or the other, right before his death. In fact, he didn't actually finish them. Somebody really close to him did. But the point is, he wrote these 5 books, and he meant for 5 of them to get published, but instead, it was just one. And it was compiled into this really long book, over 1,000 pages. If you're reading the Spanish version, the English version is a lot shorter, surprisingly. And it's this really, really interesting, fascinating book that tells the story of a writer. But we don't never really get to know the writer. That is until the end. Now, this is a spoiler alert, but this book's also been out for over 25 years. So, or maybe not 25. Let's say 20 years. Let's say 25. Anyway, it's not until the end that you really get to know who this writer is. And the writer is essentially the main person of interest. But the overall books, or the 5 books, let's say, are written in the perspective of other people. So they'll be talking about this writer. For example, let me give you an example. There's in one of the books, the narrator is a literal critic, like a literary scholar, and they're obsessed with finding this author, and it tells a story of them, their whole lives, and this search for the author. And the next one, wow, I even forgot. There a bunch of things happened. Eventually, we end up in Mexico, in the Sinaloa Desert, in the Sonora Desert, which is north, on the border with Arizona and Texas and New Mexico, I believe. And they're telling a story of the disappearance of thousands of women, right? I think this is actually a real thing about all the murdered and missing women in Mexico. There was a movie that talked about it. I believe it was that movie, Emilia Perez or something like that. The one that I don't really like. But I do believe that it kind of touches on that. Yeah, in Mexico, there's a lot of violence towards women. I say generally in Latin America, even worldwide. Maybe not so much in different countries. Like, for example, here in Canada and Toronto, I don't feel that there's as much hatred towards women. I do feel that you can definitely see it in people who are very let's say, who come from very strict or orthodox leaning cultures, like Latin America, for example. I've met a lot of Latin Americans who are very sexist. But anyway, back to the point. This book was incredible, but it was really difficult to get into because it's just pages on pages on pages of describing small moments and thoughts, and it almost feels like you're descending into mania with the author, which is actually something I really liked about it. But in the moment, I didn't really realize what was going on, Books are so interesting. I have like 7 of them on my desk just waiting for me to read them. But I've got to say, they've honestly changed my life. I wasn't really big into reading before. In fact, I started reading because I was in Colombia. That's where I'm from. And I was going through a really tough moment, and I didn't have my phone. I didn't have my phone for many reasons, but mainly because of the distraction it was becoming in my life and the potential for, let's say, I don't know how to say it, but it wasn't healthy for me. So I was pretty much away from my phone for almost 2 months, which was incredible. I mean, in the moment, it was difficult because I definitely did miss the internet. But it taught me to value the physical things like reading. Those, because I never read before. I never really saw the point of it. Like, everything was online. It was either TikTok or Instagram or, I almost said Facebook, or YouTube. Not Facebook. I'm not really on Facebook. I'm not on any of those really anymore, except on YouTube. If you're watching this there, yeah. So it's I started reading, and first book I read was actually by Gabriel García Márquez, a very famous Colombian author that lived not too long ago, who wrote Cien Años de Soledad, or in English, 100 Years of Solitude. A book that is widely regarded as a masterpiece and critical to the understanding of Latin American politics, culture, all the things that make us who we are. Or not. Depends on how you see it. But I read these books, and they were phenomenal, and it led me to more phenomenal books, like Love in the Time of Cholera. An incredible book. I love romance, like romantic books, romantic movies. I watched this movie yesterday called Past Lives. Incredible. It impacted me deeply. Like I had to just stop for a while and just reflect on what I saw. But anyway, reading these books brought me down this path where I've learned so many things thanks to it. And it's something that I recommend that you do if you're not doing so already. Even online, my brother loves reading books on his phone, for example. Now, if I had to recommend a few books, I'd recommend The Glass Castle, which was actually recommended to me by a barista at Starbucks. Great recommendation. If she ever sees this, thank you. Another book, I'd say 2666, because I already talked about it. Really good book. I mean, beyond that, it's kind of hard to just... Oh, actually... The Savage Detectives, those Detectives Salvajes, and that's also by Roberto Bolaño. And Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsfield. I believe that's her name. Very good book. Very nice. So if you're ever going to get into reading, or if you're already into reading and you want to read some really good books and you haven't read... I know I talked a little fast there. Make sure to check those out. Today's episode is a short one. I'm leaving it there because... I don't know. Sometimes short videos, short moments, sometimes they have the biggest impact on us. So, thank you very much for being here. My name is Santi. I work at Logic Pod, but beyond work, I do a lot of things. I like playing soccer with my friends. I like going to the gym and boxing. That's actually where I'm going after this. I like hanging out with my family. I like hanging out with friends. I like reading. I like so many things. And I love talking about it, especially on this podcast. So again, thank you very much for being here. My name is Santi. May you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And I'll see you next time.